Have you ever tried to learn something new, a new skill at work, maybe a piece of software, and it just feels impossible? Like your brain has literally hit a wall? Well, it turns out there's a real scientific reason for that. And today, we're going to talk about how to break right through it. You know that feeling, right? You're sitting in a meeting, maybe a training session, and information is just flying at you. And you can almost feel your brain starting to short circuit. You know it's important stuff, but there's just no more room in there.
So here is the wild science behind that feeling. Research shows that our active working memory, that's the part of our brain that's doing all the heavy lifting, all the thinking, can only hold about 3 to 5 new pieces of information at one time. That's it. And look, that's not a bug, it's a feature. It's how our brain focuses, but it means we have to be really, really smart about what we try to stuff in there.
And it gets even crazier. Not only is that space super limited, but the time it can hold on to that information, it's shockingly brief. We are talking 10 to 20 seconds. If you don't do something with that new information in that tiny little window, poof, it's just gone, vanished.
This right here is the whole game. The best way to think about your working memory is like it's a tiny little workbench where you assemble new ideas. But if that bench is cluttered or just way too small for the project, you can't build anything. This tiny workbench is the single biggest bottleneck when it comes to learning anything new. So let's put a slightly more formal definition on it. Working memory is that critical mental space where new information comes in and gets mixed with things you already know, stuff from your long-term memory. It's the place where active thinking, where real learning either happens or it completely fails to happen.
And all that pressure we put on that tiny workbench, well, it has a name: cognitive load. It's basically the total amount of demand you're putting on your working memory at any given moment. And if that load gets too high, learning just grinds to a halt. Now here's the thing. Not all load is bad. There are 2 kinds. First, there's intrinsic load. That's the good stuff. It's just how hard the topic is. Learning rocket science is difficult, and that's okay. But then there's extraneous load, and that is the villain of our story. It's all the unnecessary mental junk, like confusing instructions or a really cluttered slide that gets in the way. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to destroy extraneous load. So how do we do that? How do we fight back? Well, our first strategy is probably the most obvious one. We have to eliminate the clutter. We've got to be absolutely ruthless about getting rid of anything that isn't directly helping someone learn, because that frees up precious, precious space on that workbench. Cognitive science actually points to a few common traps we fall into that create all this bad clutter. First is something called the seductive details effect. Those are the fun but totally irrelevant stories that actually end up distracting you. Second, the split attention effect. That's when you force someone to say, look at a diagram on one side of the page and read its explanation on the other. And third, the redundancy effect. That's when you present the exact same info in multiple ways at once, like reading a text-heavy slide out loud to an audience.
And this quote just perfectly captures the danger of those seductive details. The cognitive scientist Blake Harvard says that when we tell a funny but kind of off-topic story, people often remember the story and completely forget the entire point we were trying to make. We think we're being engaging and fun, but what we're actually doing is sabotaging the learning.
Okay, so here's your toolkit. Here's how you fight back. Whether you're a teacher, a manager, or just explaining something to a friend, use crystal clear, numbered steps. Put everything they need in one single, easy-defined place. Keep your slides clean and simple. And please, for the love of all that is good, do not just read your slides to people. Let them read, and then you can add the color and context. This is the mantra you need to live by. Design, don't decorate. Every single element, every image, every word, every color should have a purpose. If it's not there to make the core idea clearer, it's just decoration. And decoration is just another word for extraneous load. All right, so we've talked a lot about removing the bad stuff. But what about adding good stuff? That brings us to our second big strategy: actively adding support to help carry some of that mental weight. These supports are called scaffolds. And just like in construction, they're temporary structures that help you build something really complex. In learning, these are tools that let you offload some of the basic thinking, which frees up your brain to tackle the much harder parts. And the key word here, of course, is temporary. They're meant to be taken away eventually. So, what does a scaffold actually look like in the real world? Well, it could be a graphic organizer that helps you plan an essay, so you don't have to hold the entire structure in your head at once. Or maybe it's a set of note cards with key quotes for a big report. You see? They handle the simple, tedious stuff so that you can focus on the complex, creative stuff.
And here's the beautiful part. By offloading that information, by writing it down on paper or putting it into a planning sheet, you are literally freeing up those precious few slots in your working memory. You're clearing off that tiny workbench, which gives you the mental horsepower to think more deeply and make connections that otherwise would have been impossible.
So this all leads us to one simple, powerful, unifying rule that just ties everything together. When you are designing any kind of learning experience for yourself or for someone else, you have to fight that natural instinct to add more stuff, more bells, more whistles.
Let's go back to that quote from Blake Harvard one more time, because it really is the perfect summary of all of this. Less is more, and more is too much. Just burn that phrase into your brain. When you're trying to explain something, your first question should never be, what can I add to this? It must be, what can I take away? And this right here is the most counterintuitive part of it all. Our gut tells us that a really complex, difficult topic needs a really complex, detailed explanation with tons of extra features. But cognitive science says the complete opposite is true. The more intrinsically difficult the material is, the more stripped down, the more bare bones, the simpler your presentation has to be if it has any hope of actually getting through.
So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. In your own work, in your life, when you're explaining things to your team or your clients or heck, even your own kids, where could you use less to help them learn more? Where could you remove just a little bit of that clutter to make a whole lot more space for real understanding to grow?